Hi, welcome to Pharma Salon. This is your host, Vivian Juder-Frankel. We feature discussions on regulatory, policy, compliance, and business issues specifically for the compounding pharmacy industry. The podcast covers topics related to 503As, 503Bs, hospitals, and veterinary. I hope you'll tune into all of our discussions, as you never know when and where an idea will germinate that will take your business to the next level. This episode is with Carlos Aquino from PharmaDiversion. I've been privy to many of Carlos's stories over the years. They're always entertaining and really shine a light on the missteps that happen in both 503A and 503B compounding pharmacies. I asked Carlos if he would like to talk about some of those issues that he sees while doing DEA mock inspections. The topic he chose to kick off with is waste management of controlled substances. I was intrigued by this because it seems like an innocuous topic. Now, I know what you're thinking. No, it's not. And you're right. That said, an organization can acknowledge the seriousness of something and not live up to those standards. And that is what Carlos is seeing.
So my name is Carlos Aquino. I'm the DEA consultant for PharmaDiversion, LLC. Let me give you a little history of who I am. I did 24 years in the Philadelphia Police Department. The last 10 I spent in DEA task force doing illicit and pharmaceutical drug investigation. At the time when I was in the DEA task force, I was one of those individuals that can speak Spanish. So I was more like an endangered species because not everybody spoke the language. And I began doing undercover work while I was in DEA task force in Philadelphia. And then I retired and DEA hired me as a diversion investigator. I did that for 12 years, 8 as an investigator, 4 as a group supervisor before I decided to retire the second time. And I started PharmaDiversion.
I always enjoy the stories that you tell me about the labs that you go into. I can only imagine the ones that you have from being in the police and the DEA. So can you please explain to me how you help? Tell me exactly what it is that you do.
Primarily, I do mock inspections, just as real as one done by DEA. And I'm very familiar with the federal laws and the regulations that are enforced by Diversion Control Division of DEA.
You said this is an important topic. What is it that you're seeing in the 503A and 503B organizations? What is happening that has brought this issue to the forefront for you today? You've been going to the various facilities. What are the common mistakes that you're seeing? And what is it that you want people to be aware of when they're doing their waste management and disposal?
So with regards to the 503A, one of the things that the pharmacy does is when they compound a controlled substance, generally there's waste and residue that sticks onto the glass. What they normally do is they just wash it out and pretend everything was used, when in reality, everything is not used.
Wow, that is a really small amount to track. How is that even possible? I mean, you really can't fault the pharmacies for thinking that it's a really minor amount, so I'm just going to clean up the glass and call it a day. How do you even track those traces?
Any good diversion investigator can come in and do the calculations based on your finished good, how much is theoretically be there, how much was used, and how much of it is over. In the eyes of DEA and the regulations, you have to account for 100%. So if 98% is used for the finished good, and that 2% is still hanging in the beacon or the glass that you compounded in, you have to account for that waste. Now, that waste can go either to a distributor or reverse distributor for destruction, or what normally happens is they put it in a hazardous waste container, and a company who's not registered as a reverse distributor will then come and get it and dispose of it. For a 503A, that's where the first violation occurs. Because if you're going to, as a 503A, get rid of waste, what you have to do is submit to DEA a DEA Form 41, which is a destruction form, and they would approve it and then send it back to you, and then you can destroy it through the non-registered DEA waste hauler. But at the same time, you are responsible for that until the waste hauler comes back and sends you a document certifying the destruction of that product. Now, what I normally would recommend to a 503A would be to request from their local DEA office an ability to do continuous destruction. In essence, you can destroy and then submit the 41, as opposed to sending the 41 to DEA for approval and then destroying.
I just want to clarify the continuous destruction. Let me just understand this. Every time you want to destroy something, you have to get prior approval to doing it. Every single time.
Correct. Yeah. What normally I tell 503A is to take all the controlled substance waste and put it in one container and do an inventory and perpetual inventory. So everything that's being wasted into that container, you have documented the quantities that you're in the container. And it's not the quantities of the finished good, it's the quantities of the controlled substances. So if, say, for instance, you have 1 gram and you have 1 gallon, it's not 1 gallon of waste, it's 1 gram of waste. Of controlled substance, not the total content of what you're putting in it. Okay, then you keep that, and when that container's full, then what you would do is you would have a hazardous waste hauler come in, take it, destroy it. You already have a perpetual inventory, so you know what he's taken. And then once he certifies that he's destroyed it, because he doesn't have to account for it, all he has to do is destroy it. It's not his obligation to keep a record of everything that's in there, okay? Once he destroys it, then you can submit your DEA 41 to DEA to make them aware that you destroyed it. And that's with the ability to have continuous destruction. And any 503A, there's a pharmacy that doesn't get approval, to do that. DEA's wrong.
What about the 503Bs? What do they do that consistently concerns you?
And the 503Bs, the problem there, meaning that they're DEA registered manufacturers, all their waste, production waste, is accounted for and sent to a reverse distributor. During the process of production, generally QA or QC will pull samples and send them to the lab for testing. This is where the problem starts. What happens there is the lab chemist or the scientist pulls the sample out from the safe or the cabinet or whatever. That's accounted for. It's logged in and then it's logged out, being taken out for testing. Well, then the chemist or the scientist will then start working with it, doing the testing. And at the end, the whole liquid, because usually it's a liquid, all that liquid is put in the hazardous waste container, what they call the red container. And no one accounts for that. This, again, is the problem where I've been into many of manufacturers that are 503B. And that's one of the areas I know I'm going to find all kinds of violations. And I have some big manufacturers that do this. And their view is like, well, it's only a sample. DEA's view is they don't care if it's a grain. You have to account for a gram, a kilo of a controlled substance.
Seems to me you can forgive a pharmacy for thinking that it's no big deal. But you're saying, yes, it is.
What happens is when the scientist or chemist takes it out, he'll note in his notebook that he took the sample and he used it in testing. But that's the end of it. There's nothing that says, what did you do with the product at the end? And how much of the product did you waste? For example, if you pull 10 grams out of it for testing, but you only use 5 grams and put the other 5 grams back in the sample container back into the safe, you'll have to account for 10 grams. The 5 that you put in the safe, which most likely there's documentation showing it going back into the safe. But the other 5 grams that was used in testing, they never write down what they did with. Again, for each one of those samples that you can't account for, that's a $15,000 violation. So think about how many samples that a 503B pulls and are tested. And if they're not accounted for at the end as waste, you can multiply each one of those incidents by $15,000 or in excess of $15,000. And it's a civil fine. So that's where sometimes manufacturers of the 503Bs don't really understand me until I talk to them about money and the amount of fine per violation. Again, it's very simple for them to get continuous destruction approval. And then in that circumstance, then all they have to do is maintain a perpetual inventory of what's going in the container. And then once that container is full, they can just have it destroyed. Once they have the certification of destruction from the hauler, what they can do then is prepare the DEA 41 and then go from there.
Join us for the Compounding Pharmacies Grand Salon. Talks on leadership, inspections, quality, and environmental monitoring. Live discussions are October 5 through 8, and presentations are on demand. CE accredited for pharmacists and technicians. For more information, go to www.pharmasalon.com/compounding.
People don't seem to understand. They only look at them as samples, but it's more than samples for DEA. It's controlled substance. So what they ask me all the time is, well, what should we do? I said, well, the labs, the R&D labs, QC labs on the 503B side are constantly testing samples. Some are controls and some are non-controls. What you can do is take a red can and dedicate it just for controlled substances. So everything in that can that's being thrown in there has a controlled substance. And then once that can is full, generally what they do is they take it to a bigger container, most likely a 25 kg or 10 kg container, and then they pour it in there and then bring in a new red can. And once that big container is full, if you did a perpetual inventory, then you should be able to calculate what's in there. Then you can send that through the hazardous waste hauler, as opposed to mixing it with everything else and then going crazy every time you have waste being disposed of by the hauler. That minimizes the amount of time you need. So you're really, in the R&D lab and the QC lab, you're going to really have two containers, one for non-controls and one for control. And it's probably much easier going in that direction. I've had people say, well, why can't I just put it in the regular? That's fine. You can do that. You want to keep a perpetual inventory anyway. So if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But in some cases, non-controls are probably 90% or 95% of the activity, and the other 5% are control. When you throw it in with your non-control, now you got more destructions occurring as opposed to just doing that one. And it costs you probably less to go through that method than it is for you to go through a reverse distributor. And that's another saving that the company can do, but they have to account for those samples. I mean, I see it all the time when I go into manufacturers, see samples that are pulled from the API by QA and sent to the QC for testing. And then it's all logged into the QC lab. And it's in the book saying that the chemist or the scientist pulled it out for testing. The chemist's the scientist's notebook shows it being taken in for testing, being used for testing, but that's the end of it. They're not clear in the book to show how much of it did you use. Did you use 100% of it, or did you use 50% of it, or what did you do with it? A lot of times what happens with R&D and QC labs is if they pull the sample, they take out what they need out of the sample jar, and the jar still remains in the safe in the lab. And then that's the quantity that they have to account, whatever they pull. And most of the time, even if they don't use it all in testing, they wind up throwing in the hazardous waste anyway, 100% of it. So if you know you took 10 grams out and you mixed it in with 2 liters or a liter of liquid, I'm not worried about you accounting for the liquid. What you need to account is for the 10 milligram of that controlled substance. Now, people say to me, well, how am I going to be able to measure 10 milligrams? Well, it's theoretical. It is, because you know one thing for sure. You pull 10 grams out. You know you're sure that you pulled the 10 grams because most likely you had to put the container on the scale, pull out the 10 grams, and then weigh it back again to say, I pulled 10 grams. So that's a fact. Now, once you mix it into that liquid, it's theoretical because you can't see it, okay? You can't measure it. So the assumption is if you started with 10 and you used it all in testing, then if that quantity that you bought in is the actual quantity that's going to be thrown into the hazardous waste container. But DEA doesn't give you a hard time about continuous destruction. I had the same manufacturer had a facility in South Carolina and North Carolina. Okay, in South Carolina, I went there because DEA cited them for that. And there were a total, I think, of 256 samples of controls that they couldn't account for at the end.
So when you mention 256 samples, I just want to be clear. The fine would be $15,000 for each individual sample. So 256 times 15,000, correct?
Yes. So multiply that times 15,000. And that's the starting point there. Okay. And then you can also cite them for failure to maintain complete and accurate records, right? And failure to maintain complete and accurate inventory. So each one of those is a charge in itself. So now you have two for each sample. So it's 256 multiplied times 2 times, right? And then multiplied by $15,040. That's the starting point for a civil act.
So just to quickly do the math, that's 256 times 2, which equals 530. And then 530 times 15,040 equals $7,971,200. That seems like quite a costly mistake. I want to back up a minute. You mentioned two facilities that are exactly the same. I assume build as well as organizational structure, SOPs, procedures, etc. But the facility in one state was cited and the other was not, correct?
Correct. And the one in South Carolina, that's the reason why I came in, because they thought they didn't have to do the obstruction, right, or 41 for a DEA 441. And I told them you do. You have to do the DEA 40, okay? And then the one in North Carolina, when I went there and I said, well, what about your wings? What about it? And, you're not keeping track or you're not keeping a perpetual inventory of stuff that you're throwing in the container. And they said, well, we don't need to. I said, well, why not? I said, because DEA told us we didn't have to. I said, oh, really? Okay, show me your documentation that DEA told you. Can I see the letter? Can I see the email? Can I see the text? Well, we have a letter. Okay, that's good. Then why don't we, send somebody over to find the letter for me, all right? So I continued doing what I was doing. 3 hours later, I come back and said, did anybody find the letter yet? And the operation manager, I said, look, let me tell you something, okay? I pulled him on the side and said, you don't have a letter, okay? And I don't care if you lie to me. You can lie to DEA. All right. If you lie to DEA, don't ever forget Martha Stewart went to jail, not for the crime, but to lie to an FBI agent. All right. She went to jail for 6 months. She probably would have gotten probation for inside trading. But no, she decided to be cute and she lied to the agent. And the bad part about it is the people that she was defending testified against to say, we told her. Okay. And what I said to the manager is, I'm going to tell you the same thing. DEA says to you, it's okay, you don't have to do that. That's great. But get it in writing, an email, and keep a copy of it. Because what's going to happen is the next diversion investigator, guy or gal I might have trained, they're going to go in there and they know what to look for, what the probabilities are. Probabilities of you maintaining your waste from production, most likely you're going to have 100% of that. The probabilities of you throwing away liners that contain the API and you never put that in the reverse distributor package, you're going to get cited for that. That's one of the other things that I can easily find on a site inspection. And again, it's the sample. I mean, you can say, oh, it's only a sample and it's only a small amount. DEA's interest is anything from a grain to a kilo, as simple as that. So I said to him, I said, well, you need to do that. And then they called the diversion investigator supervisor. And then I spoke to the supervisor. I said, look, you need to go into the section 1318. Got to look at it again. And he said, you know what, Carlos, you're right. I don't know why anybody told him that, and I'm saying probably because the diversion investigator didn't know. So that's one of the things you need to look. And I think I spoke enough here.
I hope you enjoyed this episode with Carlos on DEA inspections. I'm thrilled that he has agreed to be a regular guest with us and will be discussing the major challenges and stumbles that he sees when conducting DEA mock inspections. I hope you'll tune in for more. Thank you for listening. At PharmaSalon, we produce content and conferences for the compounding pharmacy industry that focuses on learning through conversation. It is our mantra that everyone's experience is worth hearing and can benefit from someone else in the industry, and we're the ones to facilitate those discussions. Our next event is the Compounding Pharmacies Grand Salon. 4 days, 4 tracks: inspection preparation response, quality validation and design, environmental monitoring, and leadership. Pre-recorded presentations will be released on September 20th, and live presentations will be October 5th through 8th. CE credits will be available for both pharmacists and technicians. For more information, go to www.pharmasalon.com/compounding.